At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in February 2024, a pharmacy director named Marcus Webb at a 600-bed regional medical center in Memphis, Tennessee, opened the automated dispensing cabinet report for the overnight shift and found 3 critical medications flagged in red. Not low stock, not pending reorder, unavailable. Cisplatin, a chemotherapy agent, sodium bicarbonate injection, and morphine sulfate in the 2 mg per milliliter concentration used in the hospital's ICU. The surgical schedule that morning had 14 cases. The oncology floor had 6 patients mid-protocol, and the ICU had 11 patients on continuous infusions. Webb had been tracking the shortage for 11 weeks. He had backup protocols in place. He had called every distributor in the regional network. None of it was enough. This is not a supply chain story about a pandemic. This is not about COVID. This is about what happens to American hospital pharmacies every single year, quietly, systematically, and with consequences most patients never see coming. The American Society of Health System Pharmacists tracks drug shortages in the United States. In 2023, their database recorded over 300 active drug shortages at any given time. That number has not dropped below 200 in over a decade. The drugs on the shortage list are not experimental medications. They are not new. Many of them have been generic for 30 years. Morphine, saline, chemotherapy agents, anesthesia medications, ADHD drugs, antibiotics, the most essential drugs in American medicine. Before you can understand what Marcus Webb was managing that February morning, yet you need to understand how the American pharmaceutical supply chain actually works and why it is structurally designed to fail under exactly these conditions. The supply chain for a hospital medication has 5 stages. The active pharmaceutical ingredient, the chemical compound that makes the drug work, is manufactured. In most cases, for most generic drugs, that manufacturing happens outside the United States. So approximately 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients used in American medications are manufactured in China or India. That ingredient is then shipped to a finished dose manufacturer, a facility that combines the API with inactive ingredients, formulates the drug, and packages it. From there, the finished product moves to a wholesale distributor, one of 3 companies that control approximately 90% of pharmaceutical distribution in the United States: McKesson, Amerisource, Bergen, and Cardinal Health. From the distributor, the drug reaches the hospital pharmacy. From the pharmacy, it reaches the automated dispensing cabinet on the floor. From the cabinet, it reaches the patient. 5 stages. Each one a potential point of failure. Each one controlled by a different organization with different incentives. The structural problem is not distribution. The structural problem is manufacturing. In generic drugs, the medications that make up the majority of hospital pharmaceutical needs are priced at margins that make manufacturing them economically fragile. A vial of generic morphine sulfate may sell to a hospital for less than $2. At that price point, a manufacturer operating a single production facility has almost no financial buffer for equipment failures, regulatory shutdowns, or raw material disruptions. But when one manufacturer exits the market or shuts down a production line for an FDA compliance issue, the remaining manufacturers cannot absorb the volume. There are not enough of them. For some critical generic injectables, there are only 2 or 3 manufacturers in the entire country. When one stops, the shortage begins. Marcus Webb understood this system the way a logistics manager understands a supply chain, not from the outside, but from the inside, and at the point where the system's design assumptions become operational reality. Webb had been a pharmacy director for 14 years. He had managed shortages before: the 2011 injectable drug shortage, the 2017 saline shortage after Hurricane Maria destroyed manufacturing capacity in Puerto Rico, the 2020 shortage of sedatives and paralytic agents during COVID. Each time, the response had been the same: find alternatives, manage allocation, protect the most critical patients, and wait for supply to recover. But what was different in February 2024 was the simultaneity. 3 drugs, 3 different supply chains, 3 different failure points, all arriving at the same time. The hospital pharmacy's primary tool for managing shortage is the therapeutic substitution protocol. When a drug is unavailable, the pharmacy director works with the medical staff to identify a clinically acceptable alternative: a different drug, a different formulation, or a different concentration that can serve the same clinical purpose. For morphine sulfate, the substitution was hydromorphone, a different opioid analgesic with a higher potency per milligram. The substitution requires a dosing conversion calculation for every affected patient. It requires physician notification and order modification. It requires nursing staff education on the new medication. And it requires the pharmacy to verify that hydromorphone was actually in adequate supply, because if every hospital in the region was making the same substitution, hydromorphone would be the next drug on the shortage list. At Webb called the Regional Shortage Coordination Network, a voluntary consortium of pharmacy directors at 12 hospitals across the Memphis metropolitan area that had been sharing shortage intelligence since 2018. 4 of the 12 hospitals were already on hydromorphone substitution protocol. The alternative was becoming the shortage. The cisplatin shortage carried a different kind of weight. Cisplatin is a platinum-based chemotherapy agent used in the treatment of multiple cancer types: lung, bladder, ovarian, testicular, and head and neck cancers. It is not a drug that can be substituted casually. Different chemotherapy agents have different mechanisms, different toxicity profiles, and different clinical evidence bases. A substitution in oncology is not a pharmacy decision alone. It is an oncologist decision, a patient consent decision, and in some cases a clinical trial protocol decision. The 2023 cisplatin shortage had begun 7 months earlier when Intas Pharmaceuticals, an Indian manufacturer that supplied approximately half of the American cisplatin market, received an FDA warning letter for manufacturing quality violations at its Ahmedabad facility and halted export to the United States. In the months that followed, the American Society of Clinical Oncology reported that 93% of oncology practices had been affected by the shortage. Patients on active chemotherapy protocols had their treatment delayed. Some had protocols modified. Some had treatment suspended while their oncologists searched for alternative supply. Webb's Hospital was one of the facilities managing active cisplatin patients when the last allocation ran out. The pharmacy's allocation system for shortage management is a triage protocol applied to drugs rather than patients. When supply is critically limited, the pharmacy director convenes a shortage management committee, pharmacy leadership, medical staff, and in critical cases, our hospital administration. The committee reviews every patient on the affected medication and applies allocation criteria: curative intent versus palliative, proximity to protocol completion, availability of clinically equivalent alternatives, and likelihood of harm from treatment delay. The remaining supply goes to the patients for whom discontinuation carries the highest risk. The others are placed on a waiting protocol, monitored, scheduled for the next available allocation, and in some cases referred to facilities that have secured supply through different channels. Webb ran the committee that morning: 6 patients, enough cisplatin for 4. The protocol does not make the decision easier. It makes the decision defensible. The federal response to chronic drug shortages has evolved slowly. The FDA's drug shortage program requires manufacturers to notify the agency of anticipated shortages 6 months in advance when possible, allowing the FDA to work with other manufacturers to increase production before the gap becomes critical. In 2023, the Biden administration issued an executive order directing federal agencies to assess vulnerabilities in the pharmaceutical supply chain and develop strategies to increase domestic manufacturing of critical generic drugs. As the DOGE-era federal restructuring of 2025 created new uncertainty around FDA staffing and oversight capacity, with pharmacy directors across the country monitoring whether regulatory capacity to manage shortage response would be maintained. The structural solution requires economic incentives that make domestic manufacturing of generic injectables financially viable. The Civica RX model, a nonprofit generic drug manufacturer created by a consortium of health systems in 2018, represents one operational attempt to address the problem outside the traditional market structure. Civica manufactures and distributes critical generic hospital drugs at stable, transparent prices to its member health systems, removing the price compression that makes commercial manufacturing economically fragile. By 2024, Civica had over 55 health system members representing more than 1,500 hospitals across the United States. Webb's Hospital joined Civica in late 2023. It did not prevent the February shortage. Civica's production capacity for the affected drugs was not yet sufficient to cover all member hospitals. But it changed the planning horizon. Webb now had visibility into Civica's production schedule, a 12-week forward view of anticipated supply that his commercial distributors had never been able to provide. He knew the shortage would last 6 more weeks. That is not a solution. But it is the difference between managing a crisis and being consumed by one. Marcus Webb completed the shortage committee meeting at 9:14 that morning, and the cisplatin allocation was documented and distributed. The morphine substitution protocol was activated on 3 floors. The sodium bicarbonate shortage was managed through a compounding pharmacy contract activated that afternoon. The regional shortage network met by phone that evening. Webb shared his allocation criteria and substitution protocols with the other 11 hospitals. 3 of them had not yet activated shortage protocols. They activated them within 24 hours. The shortage lasted 8 more weeks. Yet the system does not record what it cost Webb to run the allocation committee that morning. It records only the outcome. Every patient received a clinically appropriate intervention. No treatment was abandoned without a documented alternative, and the shortage was managed within the protocol's design parameters. That is the system working. That is the only measurement that matters. If this is the kind of American healthcare infrastructure you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. More systems, more protocols, more of what actually runs behind the doors. And if you've worked inside any of these systems, in hospital pharmacy, pharmaceutical logistics, supply chain management, or shortage coordination, tell us in the comments. Which system? Which facility? What the shortage looked like from inside it? The operational infrastructure of American healthcare runs 24 hours a day, and most Americans have no idea it exists. We want to document it properly.